So it is doing that thing again where it doesn't tell me that I'm live, but I guess I am. So let me just wait for confirmation that I'm getting sound. I'm getting sound. All right. Well, I got to figure out why this is doing that. Okay, everyone. Welcome to the music. Like investigate why notification. Let me pull the sound back temporarily, and I will remember back up when I'm done. Feel free to remind me. So, this is my weekly series where I'm looking at your music and giving feedback on it, giving some of my own suggestions, showing you some things along the way. And we're having a really good time doing this the last few months, and I'm just looking forward to continuing. So let me reset my thing, the volume, and probably turn it up because people are saying it's not actually loud enough. And yeah, look at that. It still just says going live. So it's weird. Um, I'm not supposed to say that. So I hope everyone's having a good day, a good week, and I just want to jump right into looking at music because I think that's one of the most valuable things that I can be doing is sharing my thoughts on your music and giving feedback on it. And often I should preface this. I mean, those of you who have been here before will see this. I'm not here to tell you what you're doing wrong or here's what you should have done, but it's all about talking about choices that are made and looking at places where wow, this was a really great choice and here's what resulted, or here's a place where maybe there was a different choice that could have been made also, and then you can consider that, whether you as the person who actually composed the piece want to take that choice into consideration, that's fine. Or if you're more, if you're someone looking at someone else's piece, wondering why they did something, and then seeing my suggestions about what other things could have been done, this, I don't know, to me, this is how we learn. So, I'm going to jump in with this suite. So okay, so a couple things first. Okay, brought to you by Mastering MuseScore School, right? This is this is me, my our sponsor, me. And as you've been seeing me say, there's going to be a kind of a new community aspect to this that I'm really excited about. I'm still putting it together, but you're seeing the framework for it. If you've visited it already, feel free to visit it at community.masteringmusescore.com instead of school.masteringmusescore.com. So I'm putting it out there that those of you who are checking this out can certainly uh, check out the community site as it's coming together, and yeah, it's gonna be the place where we can continue these discussions, do more feedback and stuff like that, all in kind of one centralized place. Meanwhile, MuseScore.com remains a place to post your scores, and so that's probably not going to change. It will be possible actually to upload scores directly to the community, but there's definitely value in uploading to MuseScore.com. But this whole business of needing to add it to the group and things like that, that's one of the things that I'm going to probably do away with. So I'm looking at the music that's been submitted recently. I see Vasily is just on a tear. These are, I see, older pieces. A lot of them are pieces from a year ago, but still, that's just an impressive output of music, and we'll be returning to more of his music in the future. So some of the music that we're looking at here is Jim Ivey has created a suite for orchestra, and they're short pieces, each of the individual pieces in here, uh, but they're big, orchestral pieces as far as the orchestrations go and all. So it's going to be a really interesting uh, um, it's going to be a really interesting thing to check these out. So I'm going to. This is one called "The Desert at Night," which is actually the second movement. I'll post that there, and then maybe from there somehow if you click Jim's name here, you can then get where his other scores are. But I'm gonna play first the first movement of the piece, and then the second movement. They're both short pieces, like 2 minutes long. And so I'm going to play this one, talk about it a little bit, play the next one, talk about it for a little bit. So let's hope that this is a decent volume. Wow, yes, wonderfully dramatic opening to this suite. And it actually makes really nice contrast to the next movement that we'll look at in a second. In fact, I think I am just going to go right on to the second movement and then come back because the contrast is part of the story here. Gotta get that last note in there. All right. So yeah, this is just, as I said, just really, well, I don't know if I use the word evocative, but it is. I mean, it is deliberately music that is telling a story. And if we actually flip over to on MuseScore.com, he's actually included info about the story here. Um, and the first episode, the first movement had, I think, more information in it. In fact, let me just jump over there so we can look at the information um, about the first movement. So, first movement, here we go. There we go. So, and tells a story here about an Arabian palace, and the picture tells part of the story as well. So, I have, no particular insight into the story being told, and uh, I want to talk more about like the overall sensations that the music is creating. And by the way, Colleen, that's wonderful about. Um, yeah, he's a great jazz pianist. You might know him if you're not familiar with him by name. The Jeff Hamilton Trio is sort of his most famous association. So, uh, So yeah, looking at the first movement here, it's it's a kind of a fanfare-ish kind of thing happening. But one of the things right off the bat that is worth talking about here is, okay, so first of all, we are looking at the score the way a score would normally be transposed. But for me to be able to talk about some of the things that I want to talk about, I like to flip over to concert pitch mode so we can see what's going on pitch-wise. And then we look at it and go, well, gee, those horn parts are pretty far below the staff. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change those both, for my purposes, to the transposing staff. So it's transposed an octave. And I believe that change, that change only takes place while you're in concert pitch on. So this is actually a good practice to be in. If you compose in concert pitch mode, as I normally do, you can set clefs that are convenient to compose in, and then have a different clef when you turn concert pitch on. And as a little trick for people writing for strings, viola, I use the same clef, the transposing clef, the octave transposing treble clef, to write for viola, because I can read it easier than I can read alto clef. And then I turn concert pitch off, and I can have my my regular alto clef. So that's just a little trick. So right off the bat here, we have a thing going on that is one of those things you learn about in music theory, which says, don't do this thing, right? And it's parallel fifths. They're a bad thing. No, they're not a bad thing. They create a sound. So if you're being Mozart, or if you're Bach, or if you're, Palestrina, you're trying to create a certain sound that is the sound of the genre that you're working within, then you avoid parallel fifths. But if you're trying to create this sound, that's how you do it. You write parallel fifths. So if you don't know what I mean by that, I mean that the interval between the horns here from D to A, that interval is the interval of a perfect fifth. And similarly, from the trombone 2 to trombone 1 is also a perfect fifth. It looks like, oh, the viola's here. So same issue here with the violas. I'm going to change the viola to use the clef that I know how to read. And then I can also see that there's a perfect fifth between the cellos and the violas. So these perfect fifths, the perfect fifth by itself isn't the problem. It's having the perfect fifth between two notes, and then the next two notes also to be a perfect fifth. So you have a perfect fifth between two notes, and then the next two notes are also a perfect fifth apart. That's what's called parallel fifths. That's the thing you don't do if you're trying to be Bach or trying to be Mozart. But if you're trying to capture something about, now I'm not saying that Arabian music specifically is about parallel fifths or anything like that, but between the fanfare nature of this and just the, capturing something that's not Western, not using Western concepts, these are certain things that you do. So I'm not saying that parallel fifths are the way to get that sound, but it means that you're in a world in which that sound now suddenly sounds like it's totally in keeping. So this sound, and I think what's happening here in the horns. I think if we looked at what's going on interval wise here, there's a harmonic story being told. In terms of, when I say a harmonic story, I've been using that term a lot recently. And what I mean by this is you're talking about chords. You're talking about, oh, there's this chord, a 1 chord, and a 5 chord, or a 4 chord, or whatever, but maybe not. I'll use the term harmonic story rather than chord progression when I feel like it's more appropriate to talk about it in more general terms. And so last time when I talked about Appalachian Spring, I did talk about that last time, right? Yes, I did. And how this wash of diatonic notes tells a harmonic story, but it doesn't necessarily create a specific chord progression. That's what's going on here as well. So texturally, the technique that's being used here is what we would call, well, there's a lot of different words for this, and I guess it's a homorhythmic texture. All the horns that are playing and the violins, all the instruments that are playing have exactly the same rhythm, but not the same pitches. So that kind of sound of having, it's called a tutti section in orchestral writing, meaning the entire orchestra has the same, and I should just use that term, tutti. Yeah, it's a good one. Tutti. That's how you spell it. And it means the entire orchestra or everyone who's playing anyhow is playing together. It doesn't necessarily mean unison, right? They don't have the same pitches, but they have the same rhythms, and then hopefully it's lining up to form chords. When you do that kind of writing, it's typical to balance each section. It's not necessarily required, and there's interesting techniques that can be had by taking like two winds and two strings and sort of, combining them as a section. But when I talk about as a section making it complete, I mean, if you're trying to tell a particular harmonic story that involves chords and you want to say, hey, here's my one chord, then you want to have that chord fully represented within the brass and then also fully represented within the strings. Now, maybe there's different voicings within there. Maybe the brass has the root on the top of the voicing, and next the fifth, and then the third, maybe, and then the strings, maybe it's the third on top, and it's a different arrangement of the notes within there. But each section would normally be complete. Now, here we're not necessarily talking about triads, so I don't think that I need to actually look at it in that respect. So yeah, Jim, I saw your comment about a detergent commercial, and unfortunately, I was alive in the '60s, but don't remember the commercials of the time. So, did I change a note, by the way? What is the dissonance that I'm hearing? Oh, it's that dissonance, A to B flat. So that particular dissonance is quite striking in there. And it really changes the sound there. So when I talk about telling a harmonic story, part of it is a textural story, right? I mean, is there a chord? Yes, if I say there's a B flat and an A, I could say that I've got a B flat chord. I could look at the bass note, the lowest note being sounded, and really, there's not a low note being sounded here. There's not an obvious root. So I could say that between there, I see basically kind of a B flat chord being formed, but that's not necessarily really. It's really about the D. D minor is really the chord that I'm hearing. So this B flat is more of a non-chord tone if we want to look at it harmonically like that. I just don't know that it's, that relevant to talk about it at that level. So anyhow, these textures, I like focusing in detail at the beginning to show how this sets up stuff that's used later on, because throughout the piece we get more of that sort of tutti. So here it's actually true unison, right? We have everyone has the exact same notes, or at least within an octave, different octaves of the same notes. So everyone is starting on the low E flat and going up to B flat. And this passage here also still the homorhythmic. It's not unison, but it's homorhythmic. Either of these could be called tutti. Tutti as a word would mean everyone is doing kind of something rhythmically at the same time, but saying unison means literally the same pitches. Homorhythmic would mean, well, not the same pitches, but the same rhythms. So, and I say this, that it's tutti, but of course it's not truly tutti, right? Because the percussion is doing their own thing. So the things that are going on in the percussion, that is what's actually providing the counterpoint against this. Typically, in an orchestral piece, you wouldn't expect the entire piece to be kind of tutti style or homorhythmic style. You might, for a particular purpose, do that, like a fanfare. That's kind of what's one of the things that happens in a fanfare. But if the whole piece is, maybe just includes a fanfare as part of what's going on, then yeah, you expect there to be other things going on. Not that fanfare is the only thing that is ever done tutti. I mean, think about the beginning of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Ba, 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 right? That's the entire orchestra basically stating that in unison. So it's a powerful dramatic device that usually then we want to balance with things like this. That passage there now is really kind of the first time in the piece. Well, is it really the first time? No, I skipped over a section. But it's one of the places in the piece where we then get basically a dual texture. In other words, half the orchestra roughly is going da 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 dum bum ba da dum da 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 dum, and the other half is going ba and this is chromatic, right? Well, partially chromatic. Then F sharp G. There's not any natural in there, so this is kind of coming up this minor scale to a G, but again, if you thinking about this harmonically in terms of what chords are being formed is not the way to be thinking of it, right? So I do a lot of talking about harmony and chords and so forth because that's kind of my wheelhouse. But that's definitely not what's appropriate in looking at this music. And again, sort of stylistically, if we're trying to talk about non-Western cultures at all, then we don't really expect there to be chords. Not that there can't be, but it wouldn't be expecting. So yeah, Jim, I was wondering about that B flat in there because I like it, but it did catch me by surprise, and it does seem it's interesting. It's interesting. It creates a nice crunch there, but it is noteworthy. And yeah, the next time you have that figure, it's da 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 dum, da 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 dum, and this time is boo da da dum. So if do dum, do da da da, or whatever it is, do da da do dum. So it looks like, yeah, you're kind of off by one there in the notes, and it did create an interesting crunch, but it didn't fit the overall vibe of what was going on. It created its own thing, and I don't know. I'm of two minds about it. I was surprised by it at first, but then kind of delighted by it also. So I wouldn't say to get rid of it. Sometimes mistakes are good. Okay, so and the thing is, this is a louder piece, right? That's why the level is good. When we go to the second movement, I'll have to turn the volume up. So I'm just going to have to keep monitoring that, and you're going to have to kind of help keep me honest. Keep me keep me honest about this. So I see Howard had also asked about, are we talking about orchestral music? Well, we are right now. It won't all be orchestral music, but we are going to look at this fairly big piece in some amount of some more detail here. And then I'm going to skip to a couple of completely different things and talk about some smaller pieces in smaller detail. So by smaller, I just mean not orchestrated for huge ensembles. So there was a nice section in here. I used the term pyramid I think last week. I think I did. Sometimes I teach so many different contexts, I can't keep straight, but I think it was during the master class that I talked about a pyramid figure. This is a reverse pyramid. So that starts with the top note in the trumpet and then starts coming down. Each note, each additional instrument enters a beat later with a lower pitch. That's a reverse pyramid. The normal pyramid would start with the lowest note and then build up. One of the things I should point out is the playback of this fall doesn't actually work, right? It doesn't do what you would want the playback to do. It does nothing. But there is a nice little trick, and I use it in my MuseScore Cafe theme. And let me just show you what it looks like really quickly. I'm going to go to the Grace Notes palette, and I'm going to add to that D in the trumpet here, a grace note after. And then I'm going to take that grace note out. Let me zoom in more here so I can see better what I'm doing, but not that much. Okay, I'll click this thing and I'll move it down an octave. And I'm going to click this note, the first note, and I'm going to add a glissando, which doesn't really show because there's not enough room for it to show, which is kind of a drag. But it's in there, right there. And I'm going to set, you can actually, force it to display by, moving, whoops. That's what I get for zooming in a little too far. I can move that note over a little more so I can see the glissando. And then I can change its play style to portamento. And then I can make it invisible, and I can make my grace note and its stem and its flag invisible. Oops, did I miss? Click. Let's see. I'm trying to select. Here we go. Control click, because if things are overlapping, control click will allow you to select what's underneath. All right, so let's hear this now. Well, you couldn't really hear it because there's too much going on, right? So let me just take that measure and copy it over here. All right, well, piano sounds really goofy doing that. But that you could hear, right? It does the thing that you ask it to do. And you can then take the final note and turn off the playback for it. Turn off the playback for it. And now you get still a little glitch at the end of it. That's kind of a bug that, but you hope the texture's thick enough that you don't hear it for real. So you can totally get those falls to play back if you're willing to invest just a little effort into them. That's just a little trick to know. All right, so I'm going to undo that because none of that's really anything that I want. Okay, so I wanted to talk about that pyramid, and I want to talk about the textural thing that's going on here. And now here again we have. Actually, let me start at the beginning of the measure. The thing that's happening here now we have what I would call a three-part texture. Well, we have bum 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 bum, and we have da 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 da. We have the descending line, and it's still the case that the percussion is kind of doing their own thing. And so that's why I say it's, kind of a three-part texture now. Yeah, and I'm sorry, my computer, when I'm broadcasting, has a real hard time keeping up with all this. So, and then there's a drama that happens. Why is the drama? What's dramatic there? What's causing that drama? I'll tell you what it is. In my mind, it's a sense in which the texture suddenly thinned in a very specific way. The drums stopped. Not all of them, but they thinned. So the snare and the snares stopped basically. Sorry that it's just so stuttery. So the snare that had all this counter rhythm and all these different things going on is now with the other instruments. They're all together. So we no longer have that kind of counterpoint against what everyone else is doing. Suddenly, whatever percussion that is playing is with everyone, and we have this whole note being sustained, and that with a whole note being sustained while something else is happening on top. And the thing that's happening on top is the rhythm that we've been hearing, but now it's on a single pitch, and it's like very insistent. Right? And of course, a roll is also suspense, right? I mean, that's like the ultimate, like, what, and the winner is, right, the cliche of using a drum roll to build suspense before making a big announcement. So I'm not saying, and cliches are good things. You want to use the things that tell the stories we want to tell, and also the dynamic thing of the sudden drop down to pianissimo, which I would say it is happening in the instruments that have the sustain. The other instruments keep the loud, and I think that's part of the drama also, is that the backing kind of dropped out and then comes back up while the repeated note kind of continues. So I yeah, that's part of the drama also. I see a question from Dave also about using a bend. So the thing is that the bend, and you're talking about that fall here. The thing is that bends are meant for guitar, and it's optimized. Everything about it is optimized to work for guitar. It doesn't actually work for other instruments. Where are they? They're on the articulations palette. Because everything about the cymbal itself, this symbol is not one. You gave that to a horn player, they would say, what on earth are you talking about? Full arrow pointing up? I don't know what that means, right? That's not a thing. It's only something that guitar players know how to read it. Furthermore, guitar by its nature can only bend up. It can't bend down. Wind instruments are actually kind of the other way around. They can bend down. Bending up is, I won't say impossible, but it's harder. So in any case, the guitar, because this was implemented for guitar, the notation is very guitar specific, and it won't bend down. It can't bend below the initial pitch. So that is a notation you use for guitar, but you really can't use it for other instruments, because A, the players wouldn't know what to do with it, and B, MuseScore won't be able to play it back the way you want if you want it to go down. All right, so we've built up all this drama and very rhythmic excitement, and then we go on to the second movement. And I'm going to talk about this less because I want to talk about other pieces. But again, I wanted you to have heard it first. And when you're building a suite, anything with multiple movements, then the idea of contrast between the movements is part of why you're doing this. And this, you don't get more contrasty than what's about to happening. Okay, so in that opening, obviously now we have a totally different feel, right? It's all based on this, long drawn out phrases instead of all this all this rhythmic stuff. Now it's based on longer note values, and it's still, I would say, speaking a similar harmonic language in that it's not so much about chords, right? There is a sense of tonality. The other piece had a D minor tonality to it, and then also G minor. I mean, maybe it was really D minor, and this thing at the beginning was more of a 5 chord. Oops, that's awfully loud now. Sorry about that. But that was a D minor chord being sounded, and I thought of that as D minor tonality, but at some point pretty quickly it really established G more as a tonal center, I think. I wasn't thinking that hard about it, but yeah. Yeah, it's establishing G as a tonal center a little bit more. But it's not about creating 2-5-1 chord progressions, 4-5-1, whatever. Within that, it's more like Aaron Copland was doing, just establishing, hey, here's my key by just being diatonic. I mean, this piece is diatonic, right? I mean, within that fanfare, or I'm calling it a fanfare because it's fanfare-ish. There's barely any accidentals. And nor should there be more. The only place there is in that line I called chromatic. Here, and sorry again, that was loud because I turned up my volume. But What I should do is actually figure out how to run the compressor effect on MuseScore so everything will come out the same volume. That's probably possible. But in any case, uh, yeah, this going up the F sharp, creating like a leading tone into there. That was really the only actual prominent accidental. There's a little, there's like a little leading tone into this D over here. So I don't want to say it's literally the only accidental, but it's one of the few. So Desert at Night has a little bit more going on in terms of use of accidentals. So at this point, we've seen both F sharp and F natural, right? We've seen both E natural and E flat. We've seen B. Have we not seen a B flat? I was thinking we had seen a B flat, but I guess I'm lying about that. We have not, in fact, seen a B flat. But let me go to concert pitch. Well, let me not do that because it changed my layout enough. So in any case, there is an imitative texture that's happened. Well, first of all, this thing at the beginning, that figure, I mean, it has aspects of a pyramid, right? A first note and then the next note coming in. There's sort of another term for this when it's one melody that's sort of dividing up like this. I call it a peel off. It's like he didn't actually start with a unison, he started with a rest here, but it could have been. If I just change this into a dotted half note G, and let's move my dynamic over there. This figure here would have been what we call a peel off, where the notes start off in unison and then one starts changing while the other one is holding. So that's it's a semi-standard word, peel off. I actually don't know how many people use that word, but so it's not literally that because he didn't have that first note, but probably you could have because that was more or less. Because the reason I'm hearing that is because basically after that the voices start being homorhythmic and they're moving together. And typically, and then the first note that enters in the second violins was a step below the top note. Well, that's how peel-offs normally work. Unison, and then one note moves by step. One of the two voices moves by step. So you've kind of created a peel-off type of thing. You might consider, because otherwise, what's going to happen is the second violins are going to come in with that F, and that's going to raise the dynamic level. So let me undo those two changes, and you might not notice it in MuseScore's playback, but it might be something that was struggle with a little bit. This F is going to maybe jump out at you a little more, perhaps, than you want. Now, I'm not claiming that it really jumped out that much. They're playing super quietly, and that's what really helped with that. But you might consider making that actually be that G and then peeling off. And then you do the same thing here, right, with the violas. And now in this case, though, this is not a step away. The viola has a G, I can read. The viola has a G, and then the cellos come in with a C. So I'm not saying you can't do a peel off that involves a leap, but typically what makes it seem as seamless as it is when it's moving by step. And then there's this really nice counterpoint that's going on where you have the melody. Now, some counterpoint going on. And so I really like the counterpoint there. And again, we're telling a harmonic story that's really just based on it's diatonic. You can use what intervals you want, and it's going to basically make sense. And then there's this really gentle pizzicato figure in the cellos and basses. By the way, for people who aren't familiar, basses sound an octave lower than written, and it's super typical to do exactly what Jim's doing here. You basically give the basses and the cellos the same part, but the basses sound an octave lower. So yeah, that's really typical string section writing there. And then elsewhere, he's got actual imitative counterpoint right here. Right, so imitative counterpoint there also, which again is much, much easier to pull off when you're doing it. This is a great example of that Aaron Copland thing that I was talking about. I mean, Aaron Copland is telling an American story, and this is telling an Arabian story, perhaps. But the idea that it's not about European harmony, right? It's not about creating 5-to-1 chord progressions and tonicizations of other chords and complex harmonic things. It's about working within a tonal center and layering things in ways that create their own tension and release without really leaving the sense of your tonal center. And so this by using imitative counterpoint there, you don't have to worry about whether this interval and that interval is dissonant and then doesn't resolve by step, or whether there's parallel fifths here or there or not. It just all kind of works out. You get this walk sound, this overall sense of the key we're in. Now, what key are we in? I don't know. I mean, there's no key signature other than for the transposing instruments. I would say when I hear the C, I do hear that as the tonic. Like right there, didn't you hear something that sounded kind of like a 5-1? So somewhere, yeah. There's leading tone into tonic if we think of that as key of C. So when you do this, you're going to create lines that are going to sound like they're creating 5-and-1s every time you have a leading tone to a tonic. So even without really going too much further out of your way, you're going to get things that make that kind of harmonic sense. And then all you have to do is line up a few things. Like he lined up here. He's got basically a C chord being sounded because he's got C here, the C that actually sounded kind of a beat early in the bass, and then G, E, E, and C, right? That's a whole C triad being formed there. So in certain places, you kind of orchestrate things in such a way that you get the triads you want to sound, and in other places, you just let the wash of diatonicity happen. So in any case, that's kind of the overall vibe of what's going on here. And so yeah, so if you're looking to grow with the sound, then absolutely, I think the adding instruments as opposed to peeling off is the way to do it, because otherwise you won't get the growth. So yeah, absolutely, adding more instruments then becomes more like the pyramid sort of effect. So I totally agree with that. So so as far as plugins in MuseScore go, there was a cafe episode, as mentioned, like a month or so ago about sound fonts. There was another one about plugins, maybe 2-3 months ago. I don't know. It could have been a year for all I know. I lose track of time. So there was if you just search through the MuseScore Cafe archives on YouTube, you'll find one where I explored plugins. So there's another thing. All right, so I'm looking forward to hearing more. I saw that you somewhere have posted a third movement, and we'll look at that at some point. But Jim, I think you just did a fabulous job on these two, and I don't know if you've got if you have any line on getting this actually performed by an orchestra, because there's no greater rush to me as a composer than writing a piece and hearing it performed by real musicians. Especially when it's a larger scale piece with all sorts of different instruments. Like if I write a piece for piano, MuseScore can play that thing on the piano usually better than I can. I mean, I'm a pianist. If it's like a romantic era thing, yeah. But if it's some complicated Baroque fugue, no, that's way too much work for me to practice it. I let MuseScore play it. But this, I think, will just really come to life if you ever get to hear it. And so I hope you do. Okay, so I'm going to move on and talk about a couple other pieces here, and they are of a totally different nature. So one of the pieces that I want to talk about, unless it's changed, is not actually available for download. And so I don't know if you are here, student of Counterpoint, but I'm going to just play the version that's here on the website, because I think we can tell what we need to hear about the piece from this. And so I'm going to just start it off, and I'll let you hear it, and then we'll talk about what's going on in it. I'm going to pause it there because I can't turn off the repeats, and move on. All right, really nice job. I like the piece a lot, and I am wondering if you're actually here, and how I should address you, student of Counterpoint. But if you are here and have the ability to enable the download for this thing, I'll happily download it and load it into MuseScore. But what I want to do is just point out a few things about it and about this style of piece in general. So there's a lot of terminology of different forms that, frankly, I should know better than I do. So there's a form Passacaglia. If I'm, yeah, why I think I'm pronouncing it right. I just don't know if it's the right word. But the idea of a static bass line that you write other lines above, this has the feel of that kind of piece. And yet, as far as I can tell, the bass line doesn't repeat. I think in a regular Passacaglia, the bass line is just like an 8-measure figure that keeps repeating, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I learn some of these things and then I forget, and then when it's time to know it again, I look it up, right? So just knowing that that's a thing tells me that I want to look it up, Passacaglia. Similar to Chacon. Okay, I want more definition than that. Here we go. That looks like less information. No, here it is. Okay. Yeah, so, okay, often but not always on a bass ostinato. All right, well, in that case, that tells me what I need to know then. It is, I am right to think of it as associated with a repeating bass figure, but it doesn't have to be. And so that's fine. And this does happen to be in 3. I didn't actually remember that was a feature of Passacaglia's, but it essentially is. Now he's calling this sarabande, which is, as I'm understanding it, more of a rhythmic a term for a dance kind of thing, as more so than the so it's a stately dance in triple time. So that is what it's about, right? It's about the feel of it rhythmically, but not necessarily about the idea that it's this figure over a repeating bass kind of thing. So, and when I say that this isn't really a repeating bass, well, it's not, but it's rhythmically is, right? Half note, quarter note repeats throughout. And I'm sure there is some amount of reuse of material here. In other words, this bum and then ba da dum bum bum ba da 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 dum boo dum bum, and I've got to see. I'm trying to solfege this thing out. E D C B B C C C C D. So I think I should cheat and just come over here and give myself place to type in these notes when I want. C, C sharp, D. There we go. Because my solfege is so-so. So without the ability to actually fiddle with notes in here, I'm going to point out a couple things and show some possibilities here. So first of all, realizing that you're working within a particular style of a sarabande as far as the dance goes, or passacaglia as far as what I'm thinking of it as what's going on sort of arrangement wise in what's happening here. The repeatedness of both the bass figure, which is the same rhythm pretty much throughout, right? Half quarter, and the top figure, the 8th, 16th, 16th, is insistent throughout, right? And so this is obviously a conscious decision that I'm not going to necessarily question, but I will point out that, well, I don't see that as something like, here's an example of a sarabande it doesn't look anything like that, right? It's got much more rhythmic variety. And so when I think of a sarabande, sarabanda, if I think of it as Italian, it's I don't think of that as a feature. For passacaglia, the repeatedness of the bass figure I do, and the use of a motif that keeps developing over and over again feels like it's part of that style. But often, like, so one point of reference, did you guys have a particular other piece that you can relate this to? I'll tell you what I would relate it to. In fact, someone must have it on MuseScore.com. So I'm just going to go there, and I'm giving you a moment to think about what you might relate it to. What I'm going to relate it to is that. Hey, so joy of man's desiring, right? So it's, if I would have to find someone who I trust to have done a particularly good arrangement of the thing. Oh, PSG. Yeah, if Bernard did something, it's worth hearing for sure. So here's his version of it. So let's talk about this one for a second. You all know this piece. Now, if I stop it right there, you're going to say, okay, so this is the same kind of thing, right? A totally repeating bass pattern rhythmically and a totally repeating motif in the melody. But then what comes next is contrasting. And now bring in the original thing again. And now together. Right? So part of what makes this piece work is the fact that it isn't literally just those first 8 bars developed, but it has these other aspects. Now, I'm not saying that you absolutely have to do that because that's how it worked in Bach, but what I would say is I saw a comment on here that I disagreed with about more. So someone said more activity in the left hand would make it more interesting. No, I disagree. I think the left hand, I'm with Student Counterpoint on this, that stylistically, we don't want there to be a lot of rhythmic activity here. We don't want there to be, I don't want more activity. What I would say I would personally appreciate would be a little more variety. At some point, maybe after the first strain, no, even within that first strain, I probably would have wanted to have heard a contrasting thing happening. And then the second strain to be, the second strain then starts on D. It's a totally typical binary form in Baroque sense. So it starts in G. It starts in G, and it ends in a cadence in D. Starts with a cadence into D. That then 5 chord going back to the top. That's how binary forms work. By binary, I mean 2 parts. So instead of treating it as a 5 chord, now just one of D for a little while. Now he doesn't give us D that long because now we're about to get some F naturals. And I feel like we've actually reached the key of G here again. So really there was only like a measure where I felt like we were in the key. We didn't get as much of modulation to D as a binary form otherwise might have done, but that's okay because he's totally going other places. Now monosizing C, right? Right? Now we're in C. And so that's good. So I like what's happening harmonically. And there's lots of interesting motion to the minor keys, right? Here, D, E, right? So we've got a 5 of 6 going to 6. And now I'm talking harmonic language with chords and so forth. And the thing is, when you're doing this, I now want to get inside the pattern a little bit. The pattern here, the dun da 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 dum, one of the things that's worth paying attention to is these little ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. These little lower neighbor figures, some of them are diatonic. They just go to whatever is the next lower note within the key. And some of them, though, go out of their way to introduce chromaticism. Like this one here, he actually includes the D sharp. Why? Well, because he's trying to establish that we've actually modulated to E minor for at least that measure. And so he's giving us this leading tone into the E, which I think is a really good thing to do. I think there's a few places, though, where that's maybe things aren't working as well as you might want. So like this measure here, the C natural that's still sustained in the left hand is clashing with the C sharp in the right hand. Now, I'm not saying you can't do that and that you can't get away with it, you can't make it work. I am saying it's something to think about for sure because it did strike me as being a little bit more dissonant than it possibly could have been. And had this been a D sharp to C double sharp, where's our friend with the with the questions about uh, enharmonic spellings? So if I put that in here now, I'm put in a low C, and then above it put whatever was there. E, it was F sharp, and then and then this guy went down to a B, right? And it'll need to be a slower tempo. What's the tempo? Who knows? But it's slow. I will call it, this is not slow enough, right? Let's slow it down more. So I'm slowing it down more. It's that clash that I'm a little concerned about. And so if I just change that to this D, but I respell it as C double sharp to keep that down a half step, back up a half step shape happening, I might like it better. Now, I don't know that I did actually, but in any case, these are the things you want to be thinking about because I think there were a number of places where those lower neighbor figures possibly could have been improved by changing them a half step up or a half step down. And I think because this C double sharp is also dissonant against the C. Now this F sharp is dissonant against it too, right? That's a tritone, but that's okay. That's harmonically what I'm expecting. I'm trying to get this resolution into that B chord. So I don't know. I'm a little not so sure about personally. What I would do, what I would not do, I don't have an answer. But I do want to point out also later on where there's a C sharp. Um, it was like a half diminished chord, and I wanted to point out about the half diminished chords, and that, and of course now I can't find it because I stupidly thought that I would remember where it was. But there was a place. Well, here it is. What I want. This is what I want. So here we have a half diminished chord: C sharp, E, G, and well, I guess it's technically fully diminished. There's no B anywhere. But the point is, he is using, or she, for all I know, is using D sharp into the E. So this is the kind of thing that I think was a good choice, to use that half step into the E. Even though it's not the root of the chord, it's the third of the chord. Half steps into thirds of the chords, you can either do them or not, doesn't really matter. But it avoided a D natural here, which would have been diatonic. That D natural would have clashed with the C sharp in that same way. That half step clash would have been more objectionable than the whole step. As a general rule of thumb, whole steps above chord tones are more pleasant than half steps above chord tones. So that's a general observation. So in any case, for me, those are the things that I'd be talking about or looking at with this piece. Is there a way to introduce some contrast somehow, more like what Bach did with Jesus, or and also just maybe fine-tuning a few of those lower neighbor tone figures to really think about whether there's some dissonance in there uh, that could be cleaned up a little bit. And so finally, I want to look at these two really short pieces by Humble New Music, who I did see you here. So I'm just going to play through them. They're both really quick, not fast tempo, but fast to play. You want to hear your version online is obviously much nicer. So we're going to hear your version of them. Give me 1 second to come back to um, your versions of them, because I guess that's probably you playing them on the piano. Is that that would be my guess, because it sounded like someone playing the actual piano. Let's see if I can find them. Did I lose? Was it on that first page and I lost it and I just didn't see it? Sorry about this. I should have had this together. There we go. All right. So that's a lovely little piece there. So I wanted you to hear the actual playing on it, because it's more impressive than hearing MuseScore. Okay, but I am going to be using the MuseScore playback so that I can be talking about a few more things within it. So really, I mean, there's a lot to just like about the piece exactly as it is. It's a lead sheet type of arrangement where it's just a melody and some chord symbols, and so you have to have a sense of how to actually realize those, and how to play these chords on the piano to make them work for you because he hasn't written it all out. And I think everything's working well. I'm going to point to a couple of places where there were some interesting choices made. So first of all, the spring here is he's using a code where, and again, he or she, for all I know, where uh, each letter translates to a particular note as a way of generating a melody. Now, normally I wouldn't be a fan of using that too much because you're going to end up with some pretty random melodies. But I think this was an effective use of that device by spacing these notes out only once a measure. Now it's okay that they're kind of leaping around in sort of a weird way. Like as a melody, E to B to D to B to G might have felt pretty jumpy and weird and random, but uh, but as it is, I think it by allowing these to be just the beginnings of the measures, then it's that much more effective because you can connect them with other notes. Now, I'll make the same observation that I made with the student counterpoint piece there, that really you've set up a particular rhythmic thing here and stuck with it, right? You've kind of stuck with da 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 dum da 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 dum da 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 dum da 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 dum, right? It's not totally the same because now it's different shapes melodically, but rhythmically it does feel a little bit like we're using the same type of thing over and again. Luckily, in your accompaniment, you're able to uh, kind of ameliorate that. That's the right word, right? You're able to lessen the effect of that by not, like in the other piece, we knew that left hand was always going to be half note, quarter note, half note, quarter note. But here you're able to do different things in your left hand to make the fact that the right hand has essentially the same rhythm over and over again less noticeable. And then you do have little places where there's nice little contrast, right? So that really nice contrast that happened there was really good. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I talk about contrast. So this piece is short enough that I'm not saying you should have needed more variety than you have. But it's definitely something you think about. When have you developed an idea versus when have you beaten it into the ground? And there's a fine line, to be sure. So as the overall structure of the piece, I think that's working really well. There's a sense of E as the tonality. Now, the one thing is, by putting this F natural, this flat 9 on the E7, normally you would do that as a preparation to go to A, adding that F natural, because that F natural is basically borrowed. Well, first of all, E7 we expect to be the 5 chord of A, right? So we expect this to be 5 of 4. So I really expect that E7 to go to A. The F natural really makes me expect it to go to A, and so you deceive me. You totally deceive me by going to the B, and deception is good, right? Deceptive cadences are good things. Usually a deceptive cadence would come a little later on in the piece. We might do some more things first to establish our tonality and then start doing more deceptive things. But in a jazzy sort of vein of expecting everything to be a dominant, like you said, haven't used so many dominant chords before, dominant seventh chords, then it is in keeping to do that. So I'm not, although then I might have started right off. Well, you did kind of start off with your grace note, giving me a sense of a D7. So uh, Wolfram, I see questions from you and about composing music, and I'm not sure who you're directing that at. I certainly do. I know Kika does also. And anyhow, this ending here has a really nice jazzy quality, but more than that, it reminds me of Gershwin, right? This reminds me of Rhapsody in Blue. I can't say exactly what line in there, but it's not just Rhapsody in Blue. It's Gershwin's adaptation of jazz language that he becomes part of Gershwin's language also, and so it's this sharp 4 into the 5, that kind of chromatic leading tone into the 5, and then chromatic approach tone. I should say approach tone, not leading tone. Chromatic approach tone into scale degree 5, chromatic approach tone into scale degree 3, and then flat 7 just standing on its own, and then a chromatic approach tone in the other direction into the 5. Totally the jazz language, but really jazz language also as incorporated into classical music via Gershwin. So I think that's a really nice ending on the piece, and yeah, I think that was really good. The last thing that I want to comment about with this piece is just about the use of the C here. Let's listen to it starting here. At that point, you've in the key of E. This is the E minor chord. So it's a minor chord. So as if we're going to E minor. It's 1-6-4, right? It's the one chord in second inversion. 1-6-4, followed by a 4 chord, minor 4 chord in the key, in minor key. There's nothing unusual about a minor 4 chord. But then this chord, C7, that's built on scale degree flat 6. Everything, and it's a dominant 7th chord built on that. Everything about this progression is designed to lead to this chord. That is where it was going, but it didn't go there. Just comes right back to 1. Had there been another measure in here where you did actually have this, I don't know if you did that on purpose or didn't know exactly what you were. Let me just delete those couple of beats there. Let's hear it from here. So anyhow, this chord, this C7, is an augmented 6th chord, to use a classical way of looking at it, or a tritone substitution for a 5 of 5, to use a jazz way of looking at it. But in any case, you created this sound that it led me to believe you're going somewhere, and in that case, I was a little disappointed because it got me all excited. Oh, I'm going to get that really nice augmented 6th chord thing. So if you're not familiar with augmented 6th chords, look it up. In my harmony and chord progressions course, I talk about it a lot. But it's a beautiful sound, and going to B would have been quite welcome. There's nothing wrong with going directly to the E, mind you, but I will say that you definitely set me up to want this, and it was, to me, a little disappointing not to get it. Over here, then, you now give it to me down here. Yeah, and so I would say rhythmically, I see a comment about Spanish musers and Spanish composers and tango music, and there is something that is very much part of the flamenco tradition also, that has to do with the sounds that are used in here. There's a flamenco thing, and I think I'm actually going to wrap up on that comment. There's a stereotype, flamenco music that is quite sure kind of offensive to me, just overgeneralized. This progression here, right? It's triads: E major, F major, G major, and this is what you get by forming a shape on the guitar and then just sliding it up in frets. You get that shape, and this is sort of this stereotypical flamenco progression, and it has in it the sound of the G sharp, the major chord, but it also has that F natural sound. It also has the C natural and the G natural and the D natural. So it has these other notes that come from outside of an E major scale. And so those are the actual pitches that are being used in here. There's not an F natural, which would have really made it sound flamenco, especially if that F natural had come back down. So if I put in an F natural here, going to E, that maybe I would have wanted this G sharp also. Okay, let's add them both, shall we? Let me just go back to the way it was and just add in an F natural and an E. Now it's actually the full flamenco combination scale thing there. So was able to hear the playing of it. Yeah, we first listened to it on your on the website, which had your playing. So I assume that that's what you're asking about. So yeah, we've gone for a while here. I think I'm going to wrap up just by playing the other piece, and so you can hear it. And if we don't have enough things to talk about next time, we'll talk more about it next time. But this is also a nice short piece to just listen to, and really quite nice. But here again, you'll be happier if we hear it on the website, right? So let's do that. Let's go to the website and hear it there, because we get to hear something. Actually, I don't know what we're hearing on the website. This felt like, I don't know if this is an actual flute, or if you just did a lot of tweaking of the playback. Great job on that. So this is really lovely, and I would suggest that you write this piece out, because this is playable by a solo flute, and I think a flute player would prefer to see that actually notated instead of using the arpeggio symbol. I think they would prefer to see all that just notated out as 16th notes or whatever. And I would bet that some flute player would just jump all over the opportunity to play a lovely little solo flute piece like this. Yeah, I that this piece is very playable and deserves to be played, and I think just rewriting it in that way would make the difference. All right, so been a long session today, but I just wanted to talk about music because it's just so fun to talk about music. So thanks for hanging with me here. I'm going to turn down my volume of the playback because I want to keep talking and we want to hear this on. So thanks everyone for being here again. Next week, we will have the community site open. That is the goal. So I think I posted the link in the chat earlier, and if I didn't, feel free to check it out. community.masteringmusescore.com. Still under development. I'm still adding stuff. There's stuff that might not be there by the time it's real. I might add the I'll add later. But start checking it out. Go ahead and log in and figure out what's going on. And Carol, I totally forgot that your piece. I want to talk about your piece. Oh my gosh, we're going to talk about Carol's piece. So that's coming next week. Okay. Thanks everyone, and see you next time. Bye. Yeah, still don't know how to get rid of that thing, so I got to figure out what's going on. Bye now.